Nowadays, the rangefinder-esque Fujifilm mirrorless cameras are all the rage, with their vintage looks, form factor, and manual shutter speed dials. But years ago, another camera nearly perfected this design even before it was cool. And the best part is, it won't cost you nearly as much to get one. This beauty of a camera is the Panasonic L1, and it just so happens to be Panasonic's first DSLR, and one of only 2 DSLRs that they ever made before switching to mirrorless cameras that we know them for today. And for being a first DSLR, they absolutely killed it. This camera has some really neat features that I'll show you in this video, and it's unlike most other cameras I've ever used. If you're into special older cameras or just saving some money and shooting something that's digital but feels a little bit more like mechanical filmy, then this camera is for you. Let me show you why. Like I said, this is a true DSLR, so it features an optical viewfinder, but unlike most DSLRs, the viewfinder is placed down and to the left of a camera like a rangefinder camera would, which leads to it not really looking like a DSLR at all. And you might notice the mirror, there seems to be something funky with it, something off with it, but you might not immediately be able to tell what it is. Well, it's because the mirror here moves left to right instead of up and down like almost all other DSLRs. And a fancy mirror and prism system over here on the side does the job of getting the image up to the eye. This design is like the half-frame Olympus F film cameras, and fun fact, it is also used on the similar Olympus E300 DSLR I made a video on a few years back. Also an excellent camera. The whole body of the camera sort of looks like a Fujifilm or Sony mirrorless camera, just with every dimension multiplied. It's wider, taller, thicker, just a chunkier camera. But there's a deep front grip, which I really like, and thumb rest on the back, which make it nice to hold, unlike some mirrorless cameras that just forego the grip and ergonomics altogether. Now, of course, one of the features that makes this camera unique is the dedicated shutter speed dial, which most digital cameras don't have, but especially DSLRs don't have. There's only a handful of other DSLRs I can think of that had a dedicated shutter speed dial, like the Nikon DF, the Sigma SD10, the Leica Digilux 3, just to name a few. And that puts the Panasonic L1 in its own special category of DSLR cameras, besides just the viewfinder placement. If you can think of any other DSLRs that have a dedicated shutter speed dial, let me know. We can add it to my list. The shutter button for the camera sits right on top, inside that shutter speed dial in the middle. It isn't raised like some mechanical SLRs would have it, but its placement on the top still makes it feel more like a traditional film SLR setup. There's also no front or rear control dials here up at the top like most usual DSLR setups, but there is a rear vertical dial that's used in combination with these buttons on the top to change settings. And it's not my favorite control scheme, but I have gotten used to it. Up at the top, you also have a hot shoe for external flashes and a built-in flash, and this is no ordinary built-in flash. It has 2 stages. You press the flash release button once for an angled ceiling bounce flash, and a second time for a full direct flash. And the in-camera flash looks great too. The camera does a good job of balancing the flash with the scene in priority exposure modes. And there's a flash compensation setting you can play with as well to help control it. And maybe it's just the mood I was in, but I really enjoyed using the flash on this camera and often switched it on just to see how it would change a scene. Now, it is worth mentioning that this camera is getting harder to find for a decent price, given it's such an old camera and it's a teeny bit rare. But I think its unique features do warrant it being a little bit higher priced than a more run-of-the-mill DSLR, which I do also love normal old cheap DSLRs like this Nikon D200. So if you're just looking for a budget-friendly thing, I would recommend one of these. But if you want something more unique, I still think this warrants a little bit extra price. And I got mine after watching search alerts for a while. I finally bought this one for a good deal using Bai, who also happens to be the sponsor of this video. I ended up paying about $135 for this camera and the initial shipping from the seller in Japan to Bai's warehouse in Japan, and then another $12 to ship from Bai to my home in the United States for a total of just under $150. And that's much more reasonable for this camera than the price it's going for on eBay. And that's one of the main reasons I've loved shopping Bai even before they sponsored my videos. There just seems to be less competition of people buying direct Japanese listings, so the prices are usually way better. This camera also did come straight from Japan with the Japanese language turned on, but I was able to switch it to English thanks to my Google Translate. But you should look into that. Some models I've heard of some cameras don't support multi-languages, so just make sure that, or you're going to be learning Japanese. I totally recommend giving Buyee a try. You can save 10% off your first purchase by using my link in the description. And this just in literally 2 days ago. If you're in the US, you should read what's going on with the tariffs and stuff, and so just know what costs you might have by importing with duties and stuff. That matters with all countries, but with the US right now, it's getting a little crazy. But before you go off buying one of these cameras, let me explain the 4/3 system that it's a part of, because it's kind of a big deal to understand this. Over 20 years ago now, there was this idea to create a multi-brand camera lens mount standard called 4/3. And this was initiated by Olympus and Kodak, with the idea that other brands could use the same sensor size and lens mount standards as well. Fujifilm, Leica, Panasonic, Sigma, and Sanyo joined the standard along with Olympus and Kodak. But ultimately, only Olympus and Panasonic and Leica made camera bodies for this system, with Kodak supplying the sensors early on and Sigma creating some lenses for the system but no cameras. Panasonic only ended up making 2 cameras in the system, this L1 and then the cheaper model L10. Now Panasonic did release a handful of lenses for the system, but it was really Olympus and Sigma that released the majority of the lenses. Like all the lenses I have are Olympus brand lenses, and they work thankfully just fine on this body. But the problem with the 4/3 lens system is that many of these lenses are extremely difficult to find, especially the Sigma lenses. Not very many of them were ever made. And then the lenses you can find are often more expensive, at least a little bit, than equivalents you might find in a very common mount like the Nikon F mount. So it's just good to keep that in mind, because that's going to start to make this even more expensive of a purchase versus something like this. I keep plugging the D200. It's a great camera. Should make a video on that too. One way you could get cheaper though is you have the option to adapt manual vintage lenses. Here's a cheap M42 screw mount lens adapter, which is an attractive choice. This cheap adapter opens up hundreds of affordable and great lenses. The only caveats here are that you're going to have to manually focus with what is not the brightest or largest optical viewfinder. And the 4/3 sensor size also has that 2x crop factor, meaning these lenses designed for 35mm film cameras give a field of view twice their focal length. You can still get great images and it's loads of fun, but you just have to keep those things in mind. Now, before film image profiles were cool, Panasonic included a couple here on this camera, which are really just like normal JPEG profiles where you adjust the saturation, contrast, sharpness, and noise reduction. And you can play with these settings yourself and save 2 custom image profiles on the camera. The camera can shoot RAW files for further editing, and I did a little bit of both, JPEG and RAW. The JPEGs, for the most part, I was really happy with out of the camera, the colors and how they looked. But the RAW files, of course, give you a little bit more flexibility. This is an older camera, so when I say flexibility, you got to keep that in mind of the age of the camera. But for the most part, if you're taking a decently well-exposed shot, you're going to have everything you need to work with. However, strangely enough, the RAW files on the Panasonic L1 are not very well supported on modern editors. None of the editors I use supported them. The best thing I found was to run it through Adobe's free RAW DNG converter and just convert them all to DNGs that can be opened up by any editor. Now, the Panasonic L1 doesn't use a Kodak-made sensor like the Olympus E300, but it's a Panasonic-made sensor. And it's only 7.4 megapixels, but as I've stressed in other videos, that is fine for a lot of use cases, including some decently sized prints for books, and of course is fine for social media. Naturally, you're gonna hit a limit for cropping or needing larger prints, but the big limiting factor for these older sensors isn't so much the megapixel count as it is things like high ISO performance. And this camera does just fine for its age, but of course it can't compete with anything modern, and images can get mushy pretty quickly, ISO 800 and above. Now, I have 2 other big annoyances with this camera, and one is the autofocus. Now, I know it's an old camera, so I'm not expecting blazing fast autofocus. It is a little bit slow, but more importantly, it's just inaccurate and it thinks it's accurate. So it'll lock on focus and say it's locked on, and then that's not the case at all. And I get back and the pictures are blurry. And this seems to be across any lens I use, and especially a problem when it's kind of dark out. And it's not even like super dark out, it's just a little bit dim or indoors. It's gonna think it's focused and it's not gonna focus. Not the greatest autofocus even for the time, but it does work fine if it's just bright day outside, it's gonna work okay. And then ironically, the other big annoyance I have with this camera is actually one of its unique features, which I love, and that's the shutter speed dial. Something about its placement and how freely and easily it moves means I am constantly bumping it, and I'm either moving it to 4,000 seconds or I'm moving it to 2 seconds. A lot of other cameras solve this by either allowing you to lock the shutter speed dial in some way, or they're just a little bit stiffer, but this one bumps really easily. That's probably just a me thing, but I don't know, it's worth throwing out there. Now, if you're feeling extra fancy and you want something even cooler than this, Leica essentially made an exact clone of this camera, just with their own branding and color science. And that's the Leica Digilux 3. This was during that Leica-Panasonic partnership that they've shared for quite a while now, and they still do a little bit of, that created basically Leica editions of Panasonic cameras, usually with only changing the logo, kind of the styling on the outside, and then maybe some JPEG engine settings and the user interface. And there are a few other cameras I have that are like this, that are Panasonic cameras, but there's a Leica equivalent version that exists. As you might guess, the Leica versions are always at least a little bit more expensive, if not a lot more expensive, for that nice logo on the front. But it's a cool option if you happen to find a deal or you just want something extra special. And then I can't not mention this, that this camera has a historic first. And that's that the Panasonic L1 and the Olympus E330 are both the first DSLRs to launch with live view, which was a huge feature at the time. This is easily one of my favorite old DSLR cameras I've ever used, and I cannot recommend it for $300 if you see that price going on eBay. But if you can find it for the price I did, or a little bit cheaper, I can totally recommend it. It is such a cool old camera, it takes beautiful images, and it's just a blast using it. If you really like this camera and you're intrigued by the 4/3 system, but you want to save a little money or go a different direction, then check out this video I made on the Olympus E300. It's also a fantastic camera. I'll see you over in that video, and until next time, as always, happy snapping.